Hi, I'm Angus Gillespie, your host for East Brunswick Television. I'm here with Professor Carla Cevasco of the American Studies Department at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, where she is also the director of the New Jersey Folk Festival. She received her PhD in American Studies from Harvard University. Her book manuscript, Violent Appetites, is a history of scarcity in early American borderlands. Her research and teaching interests include early America and the Atlantic world, borderlands, food studies, Native American history, material culture, and medicine. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Cevasco to our studio. Professor Cevasco, why should we care about food at all?
Well, so food is becoming a really big deal in American culture. There's food photography on Instagram, there's food trucks, and in the academy, the scholarly study of food, you start to realize that food connects to everything. You can talk about food policy, the economics of food, like why is a cheeseburger cheaper than broccoli? You can talk about the history of food and how even American meals have changed a lot over the last 50 years. If you go back to 1950s cooking, it's very different than what people might consider an interesting diet now. So the study of food is a way to study a lot of culture, history, policy, the science of food, really anything.
I see a lot of times when people go out to a restaurant and they order a plate of food, they take a picture of the plate before they consume it.
It's become the aesthetics of food, and in an era when there's lots of photography and everybody has access to a really nice camera that they carry around in their pocket, people have become really excited about what food looks like.
Yeah. And what is the term foodways? What does that mean? What does it encounter?
So foodways is a broader way of thinking about food. It's everything that goes into the making of food, the producing of food, the way that you eat food. So thinking of not just the food itself, but how do people arrange themselves to eat? What kinds of rules are there around food? What kinds of rules are there around food preparation? So foodways is just a broader way of looking at the stuff that goes into cooking and eating and producing food.
And so, Carla, how did you get interested in foodways in the first place?
Well, I grew up on a farm. I'm one of 2% of Americans who grew up on farms in the United States, and so I grew up on a small farm. We grew most of our own food. My mom's an organic farmer. We raised our own pigs and our own chickens, and I grew up pulling weeds. And then I grew up in a house from the 1730s. But it weirdly took me a long time to realize that what I ought to be studying was food in the 17th and 18th centuries in America.
Yeah, you probably know the statistics better than me, but something like in 1800, 90% of the people were farmers, and then it just keeps going down.
Yeah, I think it might have been around, I'm not sure, but it might have been around 50% at the dawn of the 20th century, and the 20th century is really where we see the numbers just drop. And it's partly because farming has become much more productive.
And mechanized.
So it means that many fewer people are growing their own food for themselves. And there's both pluses and minuses to that. It means that people are much more disengaged from the way that their food is produced, which can present a lot of problems.
Yeah. So how do you incorporate foodways into your teaching at Rutgers?
So I teach a class that's called American Food, and so we look at the entire scope of American history through the lens of food, talking about how Americans wanting to have access to the trade in tea with China becomes one of the Boston Tea Party happens actually because of a trade dispute. Americans are angry that the British Empire has forced them to have a monopoly on tea. They can only buy tea through British suppliers instead of trading directly with China. So in a way, the American Revolution is made in China. The Boston Tea Party is made in China. So that's just one moment in American history that we tend to think of as being about completely different forces. But in fact, food's right at the center of that story. Other ways that I teach about food, I teach a lot about the history of Native Americans. And so looking at ways that Native people living in the East were completely self-sufficient in terms of growing and gathering and hunting and fishing their own food, and all of the forms of knowledge that go into knowing how to provide for yourself in a landscape.
Speaking of Native Americans, isn't there something called the Holy Trinity, where the corn and the beans?
The three sisters. The three sisters are, so for a lot of Native peoples, especially in eastern North America, corn, beans, and squash, they can be grown together so that the bean vines climb up the corn, and the squash leaves, which are really big, keep weeds from growing, and they all, beans are nitrogen fixing, so they help the soil. Corn depletes the soil, but beans help make the soil more fertile. So it's this way that Native peoples figured out how to grow these three crops, which become huge staple crops of their diets. And also they complement each other really well agriculturally.
It's a pretty amazing story. And it must have been a lot of trial and error to lead to that. Yeah.
And it's very nutritionally complete, that diet. You can basically live on that with maybe some meat thrown in. That's a very nutritionally complete diet.
In your research, do you lean towards a historical approach or a regional approach?
So I'm a historian of colonial North America, and what it's called now is vast early America. So thinking about early America is a really big place with ties across the Atlantic, across the Pacific. What I focus on specifically is what is now the northeastern United States and southeastern Canada, so New England and the Canadian Maritimes. And so this is a region that has a lot of really diverse native cultures. Eastern woodlands, but Algonquian people and Iroquois or Haudenosaunee-speaking people are working out their own disputes over territory. And then you have the English and the French and the Dutch and other European empires coming in and trying to colonize this space. So it's a very chaotic place in time in American history with a lot of competing interests at play.
So it's both regional and historical.
Yes.
Okay. Some food writers have said that New Jersey is the center of the food universe. How do you work on that?
So when I was starting to teach this American food course, I being at Rutgers, a state university in New Jersey, I wanted to make it really local for my students.
Of course.
I found an article by a local food writer, NJ.com, that said New Jersey is the center of the food universe. Huh. And so all of the different ways that New Jersey is at the center of things. New Jersey is a transportation hub and a shipping hub. Lots of food passes through here. It's a place that has a really rich agricultural history, the Garden State. There's the rich indigenous history of food production in New Jersey, all the agricultural production, but also all the waterways and fishing. Proximity to New York and Philadelphia, these big culinary centers, and then New Jersey being the center of immigration to the United States and all the amazing immigrant cuisines and traditions that you can see at work in New Jersey Foodways. So it's pretty much no exaggeration to say that New Jersey is the center of the food universe. Everything is happening here.
What about the Lenape foodways before European civilization encroached?
So women did all of the agriculture. Men cleared the fields, but women did all of the farming among northeastern Native American peoples. So they were growing the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, and they were doing all of the agricultural labor. They were also collecting, gathering a variety of wild foods, so edible plants, tubers, nuts, berries, that kind of thing. And so they had a lot of knowledge about what was good to eat in the landscape. And then men would be more responsible for hunting and fishing, so providing those sources of protein. But it was really women who did the majority of the food production. Yeah. And then they did, because there was no refrigeration, they did a lot of the preservation of food as well. So drying and pounding corn into meal, drying meat, drying berries, and also, of course, cooking the food as well.
Yeah, sure. What about the importance of food in the history of Rutgers University?
So Rutgers University is originally established on farmland. And where does that land come from, and where does the money come from to establish Rutgers? Well, the Scarlet and Black Project at Rutgers is a project looking at the history of slavery and the dispossession of Native Americans in Rutgers history. And so all land in the United States is actually Native American land. So that's number one, that this Native American landscape was forcefully taken from them and used to establish the university.
Yeah.
But also that Rutgers was established, by these really wealthy farming families. And a lot of them had enslaved labor, and those enslaved laborers were also building buildings and using their labor at Rutgers. So the early history of agriculture at Rutgers gets really dark. And also thinking about, later in the 1860s, there's the Morrill Land Grant Act, and Rutgers becomes a land grant university. So meaning that land sales in the West are, further sales of Native American land in the West are paying for Rutgers to become a land grant school. But the good parts of Rutgers' history of food, thinking about Rutgers as an amazing center of agricultural science. Like, I'm planting a garden, so I sent my soil samples off to Rutgers Extension to go have the soil tested to see what the nutrients were in the soil. And all of the varieties of fruits and vegetables that have been developed at Rutgers.
So what's unique about the New Jersey environment in terms of food production?
Well, so New Jersey, some people will argue that it's completely surrounded by water, right? There's so many waterways in New Jersey.
Some people have even said New Jersey's a peninsula.
Right.
So that's a stretch, but
yeah. There, geographers might disagree, but anyway, that New Jersey has this big long coastline, and Barnegat Bay, the duck decoy carvers that we have come to the New Jersey Folk Festival, and this long history of hunting and fishing in the waterways of New Jersey. That's a huge aspect of the environment here. But also the landscape of New Jersey being really good for agriculture. The glacial, the movement of glaciers that created this really fertile soil and not a particularly mountainous landscape either, right? It's not the grain belt, it's not Kansas, but there are sort of big expanses of agricultural land here in New Jersey, and that's how it becomes the Garden State, is because it is such rich agricultural land.
With the exception of the Pine Barrens.
With the exception of the Pine Barrens. But in the Pine Barrens, you can grow cranberries and blueberries. The development of high bush blueberries is something that can be grown in between cranberry bogs in the really acidic soil there.
I think I read something like New Jersey's third in cranberry production.
New Jersey is a huge, I looked it up, and the top 3 industries in New Jersey are pharmaceuticals and tourism, and agriculture is number 3, which I had no idea. When people don't realize how still New Jersey is a huge center of agricultural production. And it's in the top 10 for peppers, blueberries, tomatoes, peaches, sweet corn. Lots and lots of fruits and vegetables are produced here.
Yeah, and the New Jersey state seal features 3 plows on the seal. So that's talking about agriculture for sure.
It is the Garden State, which, moving here from out of state, I didn't really realize how important agriculture still was in New Jersey. If you only ever drive down the turnpike, you don't realize it. But you can drive 20 minutes west of New Brunswick and be in rolling farm fields.
Yeah, I think out-of-staters sometimes criticize us for calling ourselves the Garden State, because if all they see is the turnpike, they'll think that that's inappropriate.
It's a very densely populated state, but a surprising amount of it is also preserved farmland.
And what about New Jersey and industrial food production?
So New Jersey is a center of the industrial production of a lot of things, and it becomes a center for industrial food as well. So if you think about all of the big food companies that have headquarters here, Anheuser-Busch in Newark, Campbell's Soup down in Camden. There's a lot of big industrial food production, which it makes sense. If you're growing a lot of food, then you might be producing a lot of food. The beer industry, industrial brewing really gets a start here in New Jersey. So it remains a huge powerhouse in terms of industrial food production as well.
Yeah, what's Anheuser-Busch? They have this big beer factory right across the street from the airport.
Yeah. When you're driving to the airport, there's that tower with the Anheuser-Busch logo on it. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Seabrook Farms.
So Seabrook Farms was at one point the largest producer of frozen vegetables, if not in the United States, then in the world, I think. So our colleague in American Studies, Andrew Urban, has done an incredible history project about Seabrook Farms, which was I think it's in Dover Township, so down in South Jersey near Philadelphia. This massive it was a family business, but it was a massive production of frozen vegetables and canned vegetables as well. So what makes Seabrook Farms really interesting for us to think about now is that during World War II, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, Seabrook Farms had a lot of different kinds of farm laborers working there and agricultural laborers working there. And some of them were people that you might expect. Migrant workers from the South, black migrant workers from the South, and migrant workers from the Caribbean were some of the workers at Seabrook Farms. But there were also, during World War II, there were Estonian and other prisoners of war. And there were also Japanese Americans who had been interned during World War II working at Seabrook Farms. So looking at the array of laborers at Seabrook Farms, which was a company town, everybody lived in facilities provided by the company, and they provided a lot of services to their workers, but they also, since some of their workers were literally, incarcerated, did a lot of monitoring and overseeing the lives of their workers. So Professor Urban has done a digital exhibit about Seabrook Farms and looking at the history of industry and incarceration and labor. And it's on the Rutgers Library's website if people want to take a look at that. But so it's a really interesting place to look at how industrial production of food and agriculture and issues of labor can really intersect with each other.
And there's still a large Japanese American community in South Jersey.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And in fact, we had some of them at the Folk Festival in New Brunswick.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. People came and stayed.
How about pork roll and Taylor ham?
So this, again, when I moved to New Jersey from outer state, I'm sitting there at the diner and I'm looking at my protein choices to go with my breakfast. Bacon, ham, pork roll. What is pork roll? So I didn't know anything about pork roll when I first came to New Jersey, but then I started doing a little bit of digging about the history of pork roll. And why is pork roll called pork roll or Taylor ham in different parts of the state? Why does pork roll have two names? So I started reading more about the history of industrial food substances, whatever we want to call pork roll, in the United States. And they actually have a really colorful and kind of disgusting history. So in the 19th century, it was really common practice for food producers to adulterate their ingredients, to replace some of their ingredients with cheaper ingredients.
Like cornmeal.
Like cornmeal, but also even more sinister stuff than that. So in fact, in the early 19th century, in the early 20th century, there was a USDA chemist who decided that he wanted to do experiments on what kinds of food additives were actually healthy for the human body. And so at the time, when people were making, say, preserved meats, canned meats, they were using formaldehyde, like what we use for dead bodies, as a preservative. And so he was beginning to suspect that a lot of these things that food companies were using in food were not actually safe for humans to eat. So his solution was to create this group of human volunteers who called themselves the Poison Squad. And they ate a lot of these food additives and had used their bodies to experiment with the safety of these food additives, and revealing that a lot of the food additives that were being used in the United States weren't safe at all for human consumption. Huh. It was a huge public relations success. People were really excited about the Poison Squad. And so that and other outrage against the food industry leads to the passage of the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act, which is still in effect today. It's the reason that we have lists of ingredients and grades of different food. Like if you buy, grade AA butter, like that's because of the Pure Food and Drug Act. It's all about food labeling and honesty in food labeling. So what happens with pork roll is that it's originally known as Taylor ham, but before 1906. But after 1906, the law is passed, and Taylor ham is not actually ham, so it can't be called ham. It has to be called pork roll.
Oh.
But some people have held on to the Taylor ham name for over 100 years. But it's amazing that the name changes because of this landmark piece of national food legislation. The first piece, it leads to the establishment of the FDA. It's this massive piece of food legislation, but the consequence for pork roll is that the consequence for Taylor ham is that it has to change its name to pork roll.
I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And what about the distinction between a submarine and a hoagie?
There's so many interesting food regionalisms in New Jersey. So I think it's North Jersey, you know, closer to New York, it's a submarine sandwich, and then closer to Philly, it's a hoagie. Then there's the Italian ice versus water ice divide as well. So Italian ice in North Jersey and water ice closer to Philly. So there's all these food regionalisms, and that's across the United States you'll find food regionalisms, but here in New Jersey they do seem to be pretty specific to North or South.
Yeah, and I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think bagels, has sort of a New York origin, I assume. And cheesesteak, that's a Philadelphia thing. And then there's always the big debate about which cheesesteak is the very best. I'm from Massachusetts, and you have the New England style versus New York style clam chowder. There's definitely a big big debate there. Do you add tomatoes or not? These are big questions. And what about these fat sandwiches?
So fat sandwiches are another very specific New Jersey regional food, and in fact they were invented at Rutgers. They were invented, there were the grease trucks, these food trucks that would be open at all hours of the day and night, and they would serve Rutgers students maybe to help soak up some of the beer. So they're submarine sandwiches but stuffed with all sorts of fried things, and they were invented at Rutgers I think in the 70s and became this really cherished food tradition, which has since spread all over the state. And the grease trucks don't exist anymore. I think that there were rules passed against them, but you can still go to Are You Hungry, which is the original fat sandwich. They have a brick and mortar location now on College Ave campus.
Is that right?
If you want a fat sandwich, you can get a fat sandwich. They are open 24 hours a day.
What about other New Jersey regionalisms?
So a few others. There's a New Jersey style sloppy Joe, which is apparently like a cross between a Reuben and a Dagwood sandwich. I haven't had one. They sound interesting, but they're completely different than sloppy Joes, like the hamburger meat, as they would be in the rest of the United States. There's also disco fries, which are covered with cheese and gravy. They're sort of like poutine, like the French-Canadian, French fries and cheese curds and gravy, but here they're disco fries, and I think it's mozzarella and gravy. I've not had the chance to try either a sloppy Joe or disco fries, and I'm a little afraid of ordering them both at the same time.
Some writers have said that New Jersey is the diner capital. Have you looked into that aspect?
So New Jersey is almost synonymous with diners, and I was in LA a few months ago. I was having a taxi ride from LAX, and it turns out that my taxi driver was from New Jersey and had gone to Rutgers.
Wow! And
so I asked him, "What do you miss about New Jersey?" And he said, "The diners." People really associate New Jersey with diners, and there's a good reason for that. Michael Gabriel has written a book about the history of diners in New Jersey, and New Jersey is both the spiritual homeland of the diner, but also the physical homeland of the diner. In that
they were actually manufactured.
They were manufactured here. A lot of the diner manufacturing companies that shipped diners all over the United States originated in New Jersey and were working in New Jersey. And the first diner car was invented in the early 20th century. It was something that you pulled behind a horse, and eventually they evolved into something that might be moved around on railroads. They were actually mobile dining structures, and then they started to be more of the stationary structures that you see by the roadside, but they were still associated with being on the move, right? This not quick food, not fast food, but food, if you were driving around and you needed to stop and have a bite to eat, that was what diners were for.
Just to change subject, what's happening with the New Jersey craft beer scene?
So the New Jersey craft beer scene has really exploded in the last couple of years. I think it was in 2012 there were laws passed that really loosened the regulations on craft beer in New Jersey. And so in the, joining in with the craft beer revival that's been going on all over the United States, especially in the last 20 or so years, it's meant that the number of breweries in New Jersey has skyrocketed. There's now, I think, over 100 breweries in New Jersey. Now, it's not competing with the really big brewing states like California or Colorado, places that are producing millions of barrels of craft beer a year. But New Jersey has really gone from 0 to 60 in terms of their craft beer scene. And it's all being documented at Rutgers Library's University Archives and Special Collections. They now have a beer archive. They have an archivist who is going around and collecting materials and interviewing people on the craft brewing scene in New Jersey. So it's very exciting things afoot in the craft beer scene here.
And what about winemaking in New Jersey?
New Jersey also, I had no idea before moving here, but New Jersey also has a craft wine scene. I haven't been to any of the wineries here yet, but apparently there are people producing really good wine here in New Jersey. And there's, what is it? There's actually an apple brandy that I think, is it Laird's Applejack? I think is one of the oldest continuously operating distilleries in the United States, and that's also here in New Jersey. So cider making and apple based products also are huge here in New Jersey. Things like wine sap apples, which I believe were invented here.
Yeah, I understand at one point New Jersey was producing more apples than any other state. So how does New Jersey food relate to American food as a whole?
I think in New Jersey you can see sort of a microcosm of a lot of the things that are going on in American food. The spread of immigrant foods across the United States. You know, different immigrant communities tend to concentrate in certain places. So in New Jersey, up in Edison, you have Oak Tree Road, you know, 2 miles of one Indian restaurant or store or market after another. This really, really high concentration of Indian and South Asian immigrants and their food traditions all in one place. So New Jersey, you can see sort of in miniature the ways that immigrant communities are really remaking the food scene across the United States and have been, you know, for the entirety of American history. I think also New Jersey is important because of its agricultural history, that it's a place where, you know, a lot of fruits and vegetables varieties get invented, where a lot of, until fairly recently, you know, New York and Philadelphia were really reliant on produce from New Jersey farmers, these truck farms that, you know, they brought produce into these major metropolitan areas every day. That's been somewhat replaced by you know, California growing and being able to, you know, having cheaper gas and more easily moving products around the United States. But for a long time, New Jersey really was the agricultural center that was feeding a lot of the eastern seaboard, which is a really important history. I think also things like the diner and food on the go are really important in New Jersey history and emblematic of how a lot of Americans eat today, like kind of rushing through things, not necessarily sitting down for a full meal. So there's a lot of ways in which New Jersey is a lot of the important things that are happening in American food, but they're all happening right here.
Yeah, picking up on what you said, I think of the fact that there's at least 2 Scottish restaurants in Kearney, New Jersey.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they always make a big fuss, I think, in February for Robert Burns' birthday. And they serve all these specialty dishes.
Like haggis?
Yeah, which nobody really wants to eat, but
haggis is actually delicious. I'm gonna defend haggis.
Okay.
I was in Scotland recently, and I actually really enjoyed haggis. If you like blood pudding, you will like. If you like blood sausages, you will probably like haggis.
And I'm thinking Haddonfield, known for Dutch restaurants, and New Brunswick, known for Hungarian restaurants.
Fort Lee, some of the best Korean food that you can get in the United States. You know, all around New York, you still have a lot of the Italian-American enclaves.
Yeah. Well, Professor Cevasco, I want to thank you for coming out to our studio here in East Brunswick and sharing with us your research on Foodways. It's been very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here.